Nice. Okay, so without further ado, let's get ready for God's message. Who's ready for God's message for today? Now, God's message for today that He gave to me to share to you is miracle. Now, there are many stories in the Bible that displays God's miracle. There's when God parted the Red Sea, when He turned water into wine, when He fed the 5,000 with 5 loaves and 2 fish. But there are many miracles. But do we really know what miracle is? Let us look at the definition of miracle. The definition of miracle, I googled it, and this isn't work. Do I do it here? How do you do this, Dad? How do you concentrate? Okay. So the definition of miracle is an extraordinary and welcome event that is not explicable by natural or scientific laws and is therefore attributed to a divine legacy. That is what the world that's how the world defines miracle. And keep that in mind, keep that definition in mind as we go through this message. So my title for this message for today is, it doesn't matter what happens in the middle. Now, miracles, if you think about miracles in the Bible, one of the most common examples would be, Lazarus. Lazarus rising up from the dead. So that would be in chapter 11, that will be our text for today. So if you have a Bible, turn to chapter 11, we'll start from the start. So my title for today is going to be, it doesn't matter what happens in the middle, because God will display His miracle. And this is shown in chapter 11, and it's going to be, and who's ready for this? Who's ready to receive Jesus, receive God's miracle today? Come on. So let's read from chapter 11. Now a man named Lazarus was sick. He was from Bethany, the village of Mary and her sister Martha. This Mary, whose brother Lazarus now lay sick, was the same one who poured perfume on the Lord and wiped His feet with her hair. So the sisters sent word to Jesus because their brothers were sick. They said, "Lord, the one you love is sick." And when Jesus heard this, Jesus said, "This sickness will not end in death. No, it is for God's glory, that His Son may be glorified through it." Now Jesus loved Martha and her sister Lazarus. So when He heard that Lazarus was sick, He stayed where he was for 2 more days. My first point for today is, God will display His miracle in His perfect time. In His perfect time. Now, some of us here can relate to Mary, because this isn't Mary who gave birth to Jesus. No, this is Mary where Mary is Jesus' childhood friend. They're like longtime friends. So is Lazarus and so is Martha. And you can see in verse 2 it says, "This Mary whose brother Lazarus now lay sick was the same one who poured perfume on the Lord and wiped His feet." So Mary has been serving God, loving God, doing anything for God, communing with God, and then all of a sudden trials come her way. All of a sudden her brother becomes sick. So some of us here serving God are doing everything right for Jesus, and then somehow trials come our way. Somehow we have these problems that start coming in our lives, and you're like, "God, I didn't see that coming." So then when Mary got this trial, she straight away praised to Jesus in verse 3 and said, "Lord, the one who you love is sick." And when God heard this, what does God do? Remember, Mary is God's childhood friend. Jesus' childhood friend. So Jesus must love Mary and Martha so much. So what does God do to someone what does Jesus do to someone He loves dearly, serves Him, does anything for Him? Let's look at verse 5. Now Jesus loved Martha and her sister and Lazarus. That's evident there. So when He heard that Lazarus was sick, He stayed where he was 2 more days. God did nothing for 2 more days. 2 more days. So God stayed where He was for 2 more days. Some of you now are saying, "God, I need You right now to show up right now, because I don't think I'll make it. God, I'm in trouble. I got some drama in my life and I need You to move right now. God, I need You to give me the answer right now to my problem, because I need it right now. I need it right now, God." And then God says, "Oh yeah? I'll do it in 2 days. Wait, my child, I'll do it in 2 days. 2 days? God, I don't think you heard me. What do you mean? What do you mean? What do you mean, brother? What do you mean, God? I want it right now. And you're saying you're going to do it in 2 days? Come on, man. What are you doing? Sometimes God will make you wait for His miracle because He can. And it doesn't mean that He's forgotten about you. It doesn't mean that He hasn't heard you. It doesn't mean that He's ignoring you. You know, I read somewhere that very often that thing that we want to get free from is something that He is allowing to remain to develop something in us. I'm going to repeat that again. Very often, the thing that we want to get free from is something that God wants to remain in our lives to develop something in us, church. Some of you need to realize this. Some of you need to realize this. Your perfect timing could be a whole lot different to God's perfect timing. Just because nothing has happened yet, it doesn't mean that it's over. But look at what God says in verse 4. As soon as He heard Martha's prayer, as soon as He did nothing for 2 days. It says in verse 4, when He heard this, Jesus said, this sickness will not end in death. No, it is for God's glory it is for God's glory so that God's Son may be glorified. We can see here that as soon as Jesus heard Mary's prayer, as soon as Jesus hears your prayer, He has already made His promise. And church, let me tell you something today. When God makes His promise, it doesn't matter if it's today, it doesn't matter if it's in 2 days, a week, or a month, in a year. When God makes His promise, it will happen. Because it doesn't matter what happens in the middle, because God will display His miracle. His miracle. And He will do it. He will do it for His glory. Which leads me to my second point. God will display His miracle so that He may be glorified. Let's keep reading in verse 11. After He had said this, He went on to tell them, our friend Lazarus has fallen asleep, but I am going there to wake him up. Jesus said, I am going there to wake him up. I am going there to wake him up. Church, you gotta understand this. Jesus said, I am going there to wake him up. I will perform that miracle. I will display that miracle. I am the one who will give you breakthrough. I am the one that will give you healing. I am the one that will restore. I am the one that will help you go through the situation you're in. Not your doctor, not your immigration officer, not the government, not your parents, not your spouse, not you yourself, not anyone who you think can help you. Because God said, I am the one who will get the glory. Jesus wants all the glory, church, because He deserves all the glory. So do not worry, for it is, God says, do not worry, for it is I who will display the miracle. Let's continue reading in verse 12. His disciples replied, Lord, if he sleeps, he will get better. Jesus had spoken of His death, but His disciples thought He meant natural sleep. So then He told them plainly, Lazarus is dead, and for your sake I am glad I was not there, so that you may believe. Imagine God telling you, I'm glad you're in that situation right now. I'm glad you're going through that trial right now. I'm glad you're experiencing that pain right now. What are you going to think? You're going to be like, hey, what? God, I thought you loved me. And now you're saying you're glad that I'm experiencing this? Skipping to verse 17. On His arrival, Jesus found that Lazarus had already been dead in the tomb for 4 days. Now Bethany was less than 2 miles from Jerusalem, and the Jews had come to Martha and Mary to comfort their lost, blah, blah, blah. When Martha heard that Jesus was coming, she went to meet Him and said, Lord, if you had been here, my brother would have not died. But I know that even now God will give you whatever you ask. Lazarus is dead. And back in verse 15, Lazarus is dead, and for your sake I am not glad. I'm going to tell you a story of how I got my license. My driver. Some of the youth already know this story. How I got my driver's license. So I got all the thing booked already. I'm ready to go, and I was very confident in myself, and I was like, I'm a good driver. You know, I can drive, and some of our friends were just like, oh, it's easy, yeah, you're good at driving, yeah, you know, you'll pass it easy. Even my own dad, Pastor June, was saying, oh yeah, you're good, I've seen you drive, you're doing good, you'll pass it easy, you'll pass it easy. So on the day of my driver's test, I was there, I got in the car, instructor was in the car with me, tried to make small talk. I was like, yeah, it's cold today, hey. How's the weather? And stuff like that, just to lighten up the mood, But it didn't work because he had a straight face and made me even more nervous. But going in there, I had this confidence in myself because I was like, I'm gonna pass, because I'm gonna pass, because my friend said I would pass, my dad said I'll pass, I'm gonna pass. Everyone's passing, so I'm gonna pass. So, and I was driving, right? So there's this thing in this driver's test where there's a part where you have to name all the hazards. I'm sure most of you are familiar with this. You have to name all the hazards, and that's the thing that I'm most scared about. That's the thing I'm most nervous about, is naming all the hazards, because you have to drive, and then you have to look for all the hazards, and then you have to verbally speak it out. And I'm like, I can't do that. But as soon as the instructor said, name all the hazards, and I was like, okay, car behind me, keeping an eye on it, giving way, blah blah blah. So I got that right, and after that I was like, oh, that wasn't too bad. Now that was the thing that I was most scared about, and now that it's over, I'm just like, oh, easy, gonna pass this test now. I've been thinking, as I was driving, I was thinking about, driving home with my green license, stuff like that. And as soon as I thought that, the instructor said, change to the next lane, if safe. And I was like, oh, change lanes all the time. It's pretty easy, always change lanes. Even I always change lanes, even if you don't need to. But okay, so then I click my signal, check my rear mirror, check the lane, and then I see my blind spot. There's this car right next to me. And then I was like, oh, okay. And then he slows down because he sees me signaling. And when you see someone signaling, you try to slow down. You're like, oh, give way. And I was like, oh, okay, so he must be giving way. So then I turned, and then all of a sudden I hear beep beep. And then I was like, oh no. If some of you, I need to explain this to you. When you're sitting a driver's test, when you hear beep beep, that's not a good sign. That doesn't mean you're gonna get your green license, with my car. No, I heard that beep beep, and I was like, oh my goodness. And the instructor says, you know what that means, right? And I was like, yeah. And then he's like, do a U-turn, go back to BD&Z, and I can ask that. I think, did I cry? No, I didn't cry. I was so sad. And I didn't pass my first time, I didn't pass my second time, and I didn't pass my third time. And after my third time, by the way, my parents, sometimes I do take your child. I can drive now. So I go back to my story, I didn't pass my third time. And then it got to a point where I was like, man, I can't drive. I actually can't drive. Like, I knew I could drive, but then I failed 3 times, so I actually can't drive, I can't drive, God. I can't drive. Sometimes God will humble us to the point where you feel like there's nothing you can physically do to make something happen or to make your miracle happen. Because God wants you to realize that you can't do it without Him, and you need Him. Because He is the one that will display His miracle. He is the one that will get you through your situation. He's the one that will get you through your exams. He's the one that will give you financial breakthrough. He is the one that will give you your visa. He is the one that will restore your relationship. He is the one that will bring you back to Him. Now, if we continue reading from verse 28, it says there, after she had said this, she went back and called her sister Mary aside. The teacher is here, she said, and is asking for you. When Mary had heard this, she got up quickly and ran to Jesus. Skipping to verse 32. When Mary had reached the place where Jesus was, she fell at His feet and said the same thing Martha said. Lord, if you had been here, my brother would have not died. Yes, the Lord knows this, church. Yes, the Lord knows that you're going through trials, that you're going through pain, that you're going through suffering. Actually, if we continue reading from verse 33, when Jesus saw her weeping, and the Jews who had come along with her also weeping, He was deeply moved, and in spirit and troubled and He said, where have you laid Him? He asked. And they said, come and see, Lord. And in verse 35, you're telling me that Jesus doesn't know what you're going through, right? In verse 35, Jesus said, Jesus said. In verse 35, Jesus wept. Jesus wept, church. And some of you are probably like, God, you have no idea what I'm going through. You don't know what it's like. You don't even care that I'm going through these things, God. Where are you, God? You don't even know what it feels like. You don't know what it feels like. But God knows what it feels like, church. God knows what you're going through. God knows your pain. God knows your suffering. He knows and He understands what it feels like because He's been through it all. He's experienced it firsthand on that cross when He died for you 2,000 years ago, church. So that pain, that suffering that you're feeling right now, don't say that God doesn't know what is happening, because He does, because He experienced it when He died on that cross 2,000 years ago. And now here's the moment you've all been waiting for. Picking back up from verse 38. Jesus once more, deeply moved, came to the tomb. It was a cave with a stone laid across the entrance. And He said, "Take away the stone." But Lord, said Martha, the sister of the dead man, "By this time the bad odor, because he has been in that tomb for 4 days." And then Jesus said, "Did I not tell you that if you believe, you will see the glory of God? So take away the stone." Then Jesus looked up and said, here's what you've been waiting for. "Father, I thank you that you have heard me. I knew that you will always hear me. But I say this for the benefit of these people standing here, so that they may believe." And when He said all this, Jesus called out in a loud voice, "Lazarus, come out." The dead man came out, his hands and feet wrapped with strips of linen and a cloth around his face. Jesus said to them, "Take off the grave clothes and let him go." He had raised the man from the dead. He had raised Himself from the dead. And if God can raise a man from the dead, He can raise us up from any situation that we're in today. God raised a man from the dead. And that's physically impossible, church. I don't know about you, but that's physically impossible, because that defies the laws of nature. And remember that definition in the beginning. If something defies the laws of nature, the definition of a miracle. The definition says, therefore, it's attributed to a divine legacy. If something happens that is not explicable or by natural or scientific laws, it is therefore attributed by a divine legacy. And if there's anything that's divine in this world, church, it is our God, the one who turned water into wine, the one who parted the Red Sea, the one who fed the 5,000, and the one who raised the man back to life, the one who raised Himself back to life, is the same one who lives in you right now. And the same one who is for you and not against you is the same one who will display His miracle in your life. So do not be afraid, church, and know who is with you. Know who is going to display His miracle, church. I'm going to finish with this because Pastor Gene only gave me 10 minutes. If there's anything I want you to remember from my preaching, perhaps you've been asleep this whole time and then you managed to wake up just in time for conclusion. If there's one thing I want you to hear from my message, or if there's one thing I want you to remember from my message, it is this. Remember at the start of the story, Lazarus was only sick, and he stayed where he was 2 more days. But when Jesus finally came, Lazarus was already dead. Now tell me, what would happen if Jesus straight away heard that Lazarus was sick and rushed straight to Bethany and said, "Oh, I gotta heal him, I gotta heal him"? Would there have been a miracle? Would there have been a miracle if God didn't stay where He was for 2 days? Tell me how God can display His miracle, and how would He have been glorified if He had rushed to Bethany? Sometimes in our life, God allows us to go through things to make room for His miracle. Church, I'm going to say that again. Some of you here needs to hear this. Sometimes God makes us go through things to make room for His miracle. Do you get that, church? Sometimes God will make us go through things to make room for His miracle. Now, Jesus had spoken the end from the beginning. Jesus knew that from the very start. What will happen. That's why He made a promise. He said this sickness will not end in death. From the very start, even before Lazarus had died, even before he's woken up, He already promised. Because your story has already been written, church. You already have a promise. You may feel like you're sick Lazarus, who is struggling with something for quite a while, or you may feel like you're dead Lazarus, who's given up, who has no hope, and you feel like there's nothing you can physically do to make things better anymore. But let me tell you something, brother. It's not over yet, because you are in the middle of your story. But remember this, church, His promise, He has made His promise, and your miracle is coming. And it doesn't matter what happens in the middle, because God will display His miracle. Thank you, church, for this opportunity to speak.